15. Mandalorians are surprisingly unconcerned with biological lineage. Their definition of offspring or parent is more by relationship than birth. Adoption is extremely common, and it's not unusual for soldiers to take war orphans as their sons or daughters. If they impress them with their aggression and tenacity. They also seem tolerant of marital infidelity during long separations, as long as any child resulting from it is raised by them. Mandalorians define themselves by culture and behavior alone. It is an infinity with key expressions of this culture: loyalty, strong self-identity, emphasis on physical endurance, and discipline that causes some ethnic groups, such as those of Concord Dawn in particular, to gravitate toward Mandalorian communities, thereby reinforcing a common set of genes derived from a wide range of populations. The instinct to be a protective parent is especially dominant. They have accidentally bred a family-oriented warrior population and continue to reinforce it by absorbing like-minded individuals and groups. Mandalorian's identity and its influence on genome, published by the Galactic Institute of Anthropology. Logistics Center, Grand Army of the Republic, Coruscant Command, HQ, 0815 hours, 384 days after Geonosis. This was no place for a fighting man to be when his brothers were out in the field. But Odo reasoned that the faster he identified and neutralized the informant, the sooner he could leave this office job. Crone, that banal voice said. The creature was riding him today. It was a bad idea, normally. Clone, have you input the overnight batch of data yet? I know at least 10 ways to kill you without a weapon, lizard. I'd like to try them all. Yes, Gris, Odo said. Being nice, compliant, core. I have. Then you should have told me immediately. Odo heard Scarata's constant admonishment in his head, and kept his temper. Odyssey, Ibika. Easy, son. This cloak wasn't fit to clean Kor's boots. He certainly wasn't fit to clean his. My apologies, Odo said, acting the calm man that he definitely wasn't right then. It won't happen again. Bethany Renan raised her head from her screen very slowly. She was distressingly pretty. The symmetry of her features made him uncomfortable because he wanted to stare, and his male instinct said pursue, but his brain said suspect. Gris, if you have a concern about data management, might I suggest you raise it with me first? The warmth in her voice had disappeared completely. The frequency dropped as her lips compressed. Odo could see her in his peripheral vision. She had a way of switching off that vivid smile and just freezing for a few moments. This was someone used to obedience in those around her. Trooper Core is doing what I asked of him. Odo had no idea if that was true, or if she was saving him embarrassment. He managed a placatory smile anyway. Watching Cora last night had honed his act a little more. As he worked, inputting vessel pennant codes and supply routes into the program that fed the wall display. He pondered on the one solid piece of information he had. The advanced schedule for movements of men and materiel was stripped out to provide confirmation messages. One internal stream went to guard logistics, battalions, and fleet ops, and one external stream was relayed to the thousands of civilian contractors who provided supplies and transport. The two sets of data were different, so this had to be the data that was left on a chip at the drop point within the complex, the one that Vinagis had helpfully described to Val, whether she wanted to or not. The bomb attacks had been spread throughout the contractors and military supply networks. Whoever executed the attacks had both sets of data, and copying data showed no audit trail. Relaying data from the system did, and that was what routine security watched. Old tech beat state-of-the-art with depressing frequency. All Odo had to do now was watch the surveillance images of the drop point at the female freshers. So far, it had picked up nothing. He had no idea how frequently the Separatists contact, and he had to assume it was one. Checked the locker, but nobody had shown up. Maybe they hadn't missed just yet. It was nearly noon when Supervisor Renan got up and left the operations room. On a whim, Odo laid his helmet on its side on the desk next to him at an angle where he could discreetly view the feed from the freshers playing out on his HUD. Renan was not the kind of woman who belonged here. Some uneasiness told him so. Calbira had told him that a strong hunch was usually based on subconscious observations of hard facts, and was to be treated with respect. The grainy blue image showed Renan entering the freshers. She didn't glance around. She paused at the lockers, scanned along them with her head moving, visibly tucked a strand of pale hair behind one ear, and bent to open several unlocked doors, until she appeared to tire of it and left again. She reappeared in the ops room a minute later, and gave him a regretful smile that appeared utterly sincere. Something had irked her. Odo thought disappointed. Then he wondered why he felt that disappointment, and realized it was due to impulses unconnected to the business in hand. And business, of course, had just taken a turn for the better. His shift finished when hers did at 1600. He would spend the next few hours working out exactly how to remove her without alerting any other separatist contacts that might be in her cell. He wanted them all. 1100 hours, 384 days after Geonosis. Commercial Zone, Quadrant N09. Agreed meeting point to open negotiations with interested parties. Lazy Shakira, Fai said, glancing at his chrono. What time do they call this? Well, if they got here before us, and we can't see 'em, we're probably dead meat. Damen was somewhere on the opposite side of the bank of the core plaza, 3 floors above the pedestrian area, in a storeroom he had infiltrated. Fai couldn't see him, but his voice was clearly audible in his head. The bead comlink was so sensitive that it picked up sub-vocalizations via the Eustachian tube. They'd been here since 23:30 last night. They had observed and noted every cleaning droid, automated walkways sweepers, late worker, early morning commuters, shopper, drunk, CSF foot patrol, delivery repulsor, unlicensed calf vendor, and truant school kids that had passed in and out of the plaza from any direction. They had also swept the cliff walls of office buildings, and to Fai's great interest, noted that some employees did not catch up with the filing after hours if they had colleagues of the opposite sex with them. And every couple of hours, Etain Termukan had walked briskly across the plaza as if she had business somewhere, sweeping the area with whatever extra senses Jedi had that enabled them to detect concealed people. Etain was said to be good at that. She could place the squad to within a meter each time she passed. If I heard Daman move or swallow, and he wasn't sure if it was because he could see her or because she was reaching out to him in the Force. I suddenly wanted the uncomplicated focus of a totally military life on Commando. You're getting distracted. Think of the job in hand. Maybe they let him keep the bead comlink after this op. They'd never miss a few back at HQ, surely. I want my HUD back, Daman said. I want my enhanced view. But you get to wear face camo instead. Makes you feel wild and dangerous. I'm wild, Sev's voice said. Sev was behind a roof balustrade, under a pile of discarded plastroid sheeting. And then I get dangerous. Shut up. Copy that, Fai said cheerfully, and clicked his back teeth twice to exit Sev's open comlink channel. It was far too noisy an environment for their quiet conversation to be heard anyway. Miserable Tikut. Don't mind him, Scorch was at walkway level about 50 meters west of the meeting point. lying prone in a disused horizontal axis shaft. He'll be fine once he's killed something. Daman had a Verpine rifle with live rounds, as did Sev. Fire and Scorch had the non-lethal tracking projectiles, 12 rounds each. The Verp was truly lovely. I had always wondered just how many credits Sergeant Cal had made over the years. His growing collections of expensive exotic weapons and the modest extravagance of his Bantha jacket were the only visible signs that it might have been a lot. Possible contact. First walkway level, my left of the bank entrance. I adjusted his scope and tracked right. It was a boy he'd seen before. Human. Very short, scrubby, light hair, gangly. He was still hanging around the plaza. If he was a Sep, he was a disgracefully amateurish one. They watched for a few minutes, and then a young girl in a bright yellow tunic raced up to the boy and flung her arms around him. They kissed enthusiastically, drawing glances from passerbys. I think he knows her, Fi said. He felt his face burn. It bothered him, and he looked away. Well, that's just you and Nina left on the shelf now. That your brothers are spoken for, Scorch said. There was a pause. Daman cut in. You got a point to make, Nevard? I think it's kind of encouraging, Scorch chuckled. Atten gets a cute Trilek. Dog gets his very own general. And Scorch gets a thick ear if he doesn't shut it right now. The comlink was suddenly silent except for the occasional sound of swallowing. Daman wasn't in a joking mood when it came to Etain. He never had been, not even on Kulora, when there hadn't been anything going on between them. Why is this hurting so much? Why do I feel I've been cheated? Calbier, why didn't you prepare me for this? It was too distracting. Fi shut his eyes for a few moments and went into the sequences he had learned to center himself when the battlefield pressed in on him. Controlled breathing, concentrating on nothing except the next inhalations, ignoring everything that wasn't of the next moment. It took a while. He shut out the world. Then he found that he had his eyes open without even realizing, and he was simply following movement on the plaza below, through the breathtakingly accurate scope of the Verpine rifle. Now, do we get the best kit or what? He said, becoming the confident man he wanted to be again. Name me another army where you get handcrafted Verps to play with. The Verpine army, Scorch said. Do they have an army? Do they need one? Silence descended again. At 11:50, Sev cut into the comlink circuit. Stand by. Cal's moving into position. Scarata wandered into the plaza from the direction of the Senate with Jusik, one on side and an excited Lord Merdalan straining on a leash on the other. He was doing a creditable job of looking as if the Strela were his constant companion. The animal seemed remarkably content with him, given the number of times Scott had driven it off or thrown his knife at it over the years. Maybe the rise of strange new scents had thrilled the Strill enough that it didn't much care that the man who usually shouted at it was holding the leash. Vi watched as they took up a position near the door. Sitting down on an ornate steel seat shaped like a bow, Scarata's voice came over the comlink circuit. "How's my boys?" "Cramp, Sarge," Darman said. "And Fi's dribbling over your verpine. He can clean it, then. Ready?" "Ready." At 11:59, a human male in his 40s, green casual tunic, brown pants, color length brown hair, beard, tall, lean build, walked toward Scarata and Jusek in a purposeful line. Fi tracked him. "Got him, Fi," Darman said. If anything went wrong, the man would be dead in a fraction of a second from a silent, high-kinetic round in his back. "Escort," Sev said. "Looks like 4. 3 male, 1 female, all human. 1 male 20 meters south of Darman. Spread out, but all moving towards Scarata." "Got him." "Got the female," Scorch said. "You sure they're with the beard?" "Yeah. Check their eye line, Fi. They're washing him, nothing else. They are pretty cool about it, but they're obviously not professionals. They shouldn't even be looking his way." Etane's voice cut in. "There's another female approaching slowly on the Senate side of the bench. I'm moving in behind her, so you can spot her." Sev cut in. "Any more?" "I can only sense 4 others, plus the man approaching Cal." "Ah, look. They've taken up positions to block the main pedestrian routes of the plaza." "Thank you. I love a target that identifies itself." "I hope this doesn't turn into a shooting match," Scorch said. "Too many civvies." "I can get a clear shot," Sev said. "And I can take at least 3 out from here. Relax. You just worry about tagging 'em." "Tagging? Would they feel it?" Fi dropped in an EM filter with a touch on the optics housing. He focused the scope on the woman now, standing almost under Darman's position, by the walkway, heading toward quadrant N10. Shoulder-length red hair, blue business suit, tan leather document bag. The filter detected electromagnetic emissions, which made it not only handy for locating someone operating a comlink, but also just perfect for seeing it if dust had hit its target. It cast a pinkish-brown tinge across the image. He checked for indications of wind speed. The woman's hair was moving slightly in the breeze. A flimsy cup discarded near the calf vendor rolled a little way along the paving. Vi adjusted his scope and checked the air temperature, which had crept up a fraction in the last 20 minutes. He adjusted the VURP settings again and settled the weapon on his forearm. Relax. Power coil set to medium. Don't want her to feel the projectile hit her. Don't want to spray the dust over the whole plaza either. The crosshairs settled. So that's a Strill. The man's voice was a little fuzzy, but if I could hear the accent, even if he didn't recognize it. Charming. Call me Perive. And you can call me Cal. Thigh closed his eyes for a second and slowed his breathing. When he opened them, the aim was still dead center of the woman's chest. So, let's see the goods. Thigh exhaled slowly and held his breath. Here, take it and have it tested. Thigh's fingers tightened on the end of the trigger. The VURP was so finely constructed that all he felt was a sudden lack of resistance under his finger, and the rifle fired, silent and without recoil. How much stuff in all? 100 kilos. More if you need it. A smoke-like white puff billowed in Thigh's filter. The projectile had burst on contact, showering the woman with microscopic tracking powder, each tiny fragment capable of relaying its location back to the base receiver at Kribus, or even to a HUD. She glanced down as if an insect had landed on her, and then simply brushed the end of her nose as if she'd inhaled pollen. 500 grade. All of it, said Cal. Debts. How many? 3,000 or 4,000. 500 grade. I have it. Debts. Just a matter of acquiring them discreetly. A day, maybe. Confirm. Female target in blue, marked. Thigh tracked the rifle 90 degrees to his left, targeting the male farthest from Cal. Black jacket. Breathe easy. Relax. He aimed and adjusted the scope again, held his breath at the comfortable point of exhalation, and fired for a second time. Again, the man reacted and looked for something on his chest, then carried on watching Scarata as if nothing had happened. Male, black jacket, target marked. So they can feel it strike then. Don't hog them all, Scott said. I want to go. All yours, Navad. Targeting the male right of Scarata, grey robe. Thigh lined up his EM scope on Scorch's target to observe. Scorch breathing paused, and then Thigh saw a puff of white smoke bloom on the grey robe. He didn't react at all. Now the other male, red vest, left of Scarata, by the calf vendor. No, keep still, you decoot. That's better. Scorch was silent again. Thigh watched through the EM filter. The projectile burst neatly on the man's shoulder, and he brushed his nose without noticing, just like the first woman. Maybe it was a combination of seeing absolutely nothing as the pellet's binding agent vaporized, and being hyped up on adrenaline during a mission. They weren't tuned in too much beyond seeing and not being seen. Okay, who's taking beard guy? Periv. Me, Fi said. If I make it 3 for 3, do I get to keep him? You know, stuffed and mounted. He'd make a nice stand for your Hoken armor. Periv, beard guy, stood at a slight angle, moving a little as he spoke to Skarata. He held the small pack of thermal plastoid in his hand, about 100 grams of it, and was squeezing it between his fingers, while glancing at the wrapping. It looked for all the world like a spice deal, and Fi wondered for a moment if they were all blind to how obvious that might appear. Worry about that later. Tag him. Turn around, Shakar. I don't want to hit your back. Fi had settled into rhythm now. He washed through the scope as Periv slipped the plastoid into his pocket and stood with one hand on his belt, turning idly back and forth, presenting a good expanse of back, and then a narrow angle of shoulder. Fi relaxed, aimed, and went for the shoulder, anticipating the turn. Woof. The tracker projectile struck home and got no reaction. Okay, we'll take a look at this and get back to you tomorrow at noon, Preeve said. If we like it, we meet somewhere private. If we don't, you never hear from me again. Suits me, said Skarata. What about the second woman? Fi said. Etain, where are you? About 3 meters to her left. Can you edge her clear of the civvies? Okay. Fi listened. Skarata could hear all this on his comlink bead. 2. It took some skills to carry on talking with someone having a 5-way conversation in your ear. Excuse me, Etain said. I'm hopelessly lost. Can you show me how I get to Quadrant N10? Fi watched as the woman simply paused, looked at Etain with surprise, and then began pointing out the connecting walkway. Etain moved. The woman stepped out farther, pointing again. Thank you, Etain said, and walked on. Woof. The projectile plumbed light on the woman's shoulder, and she brushed her nose. All 6 tagged, Fi said. He changed channels with an exaggerated click of his molars. Nina, you receiving? Got 'em all, said Nina's voice. Several quadrants away in Kribus. Nice vivid traces on the holochart. Okay, Fi let his head drop to ease his neck muscles. You can wind up now, Sarge. The old Dikut's good at it, isn't he? Squash betrayed a grudging fondness. Skarata could hear the conversation, and Squatch knew it. I'd love to know where he learned to do all that. Skarata's face didn't even twitch, nor did Jusik. Jusik was just looking around as a gangster's errand boy was supposed to, appearing alert but not too bright. My intermediary says you have lots of army friends, Periv said, Contacts, Scott has said, not friends. Don't like our army then? Just useful, just clones. Not worried what happens to them? You're not some decutala liberal trying to recruit me, are you, son? No, I don't give a mott's backside about clones. I'm in this for me and my family. Just curious. We'll be in touch. If we like the goods. Scarata simply sat with his hands thrust into his pockets, apparently watching the Strill, which had stretched out in an ungainly pile of loose skin, with his head under the bench, trailing drool. Jusek chewed vacantly, also staring ahead. Vi and the sniper team watched Periv, and the 5 targets disperse into walkways and down ramps. They waited. Anyone else spot a Jabimi accent there? Jusek asked. Scarza leaned over and appeared to be about to pat Murd. I reckon so. Vi waited for it to sink its teeth in him, but he stopped short of touching it, and the animal simply rolled over to watch his hand with malevolently curious eyes. I remembered the Strill from Commando. It seemed smaller now that he was a grown man. Once it was bigger than he was. Eventually, there was a long sigh of relief. I sense they're all gone, Jusek said. Nina, are they clear of the plaza area? Nina grunted. Confirmed. You can move now. Stand down, lads, Scarta said at last. Well done. Nice job, Etain, said Dalman's voice. Yeah, okay. Well done, the Mystic Mob, too. Scarata tugged on Murd's leash. The pile of fur scrambled onto all 6 legs and shook itself. Let's thin out carefully. And don't forget to wipe off the face camo before you move. We'll all be back at Kribu's by 13:15. Then get some rest. Sounds good, Vi said. It was only when the tension had passed that he realized how stiff his joints felt, and how much parts of him hurt from 12 hours and more lying prone on the makeshift padding of his jacket. Hot bath, hot meal, and sleep. Scarata cut in. You know I didn't mean that, don't you? What? About clones. Kribu obviously mentioned you to his scum associates. Of course we know, Sarge, Squat said. You said you were in this for your family, didn't you? Logistics Center. Grand Army of the Republic. Coruscant Command. HQ. 1615 hours. 384 days after Geonosis. Odo listened to his concealed comlink with a practiced expression of blank disinterest, while he keyed in traffic movements. The holochart that covered every centimeter of wall space shifted and pulsed as consignments turned from red to green, now laden, cross-checked, and en route, and requests for replenishment stacked up in a panel of blue horizontal bars. The holochart gave no numbers of troops, but a little common sense would have told anyone who wanted to spend the time thinking through the obvious that they were thinly stretched. There were, Oda knew, at least 1,000,000 troops now in the field, spread over hundreds of worlds, small forces on some, multiple battalions on others. It meant long supply chains, and those were inherently vulnerable. So why didn't the separatist terror network target them off-world? No ability. No suitable vessels or skills. Or maybe the point was to intimidate the seat of galactic government after all. Motive mattered. Motive gave you the capacity to think like the enemy, want what they wanted, and then snatch it from them. And killing clone troopers, mainly troopers, if you didn't count the unfortunate civilians, who were also in the way, made the point that the Seps could come and go as they pleased. Odo took it personally. He drew on the memory of sharp, cold fear and focused hatred that he had learned on Commando before a total stranger had stepped in front of him and saved his life. We can trust nobody but our brothers and Calbier. Over the comlink, he could still hear Nina's exclamations of satisfactions. The 6 men and women tagged by Phi and Sev were dispersing all over the galactic city, leaving routes and stopping points that Nina and Boss were logging on a holochart that showed every skyline quadrant and building on Coruscant. Judging by their occasional descent into the rich Mandalorian invective that Calbier considered an important part of their continuing education, they were learning more than anyone had bargained for. Oda would evaluate it all when he returned, but the number of locations that the tagging had registered had now reached 20. It was growing into something larger than a 14-man team might be able to handle. Oda wanted to tell them to concentrate on the clusters, the areas of most traffic, but it would have to wait. The strip cam had yielded nothing, except the fact that females of all species employed in the center seemed to spend a lot of time in the freshers, rearranging their appearance. Whoever had been used to collecting the data probably knew Vina Jis was gone now, and was no doubt trying another route. He kept a careful eye on Supervisor Renan, because she seemed to be getting increasingly agitated as the day wore on. He could hear it in her voice. She didn't like Gris. She was checking something. When he went to the freshers, she was still on the same screen when he returned, scrolling up and down an inventory. She was checking rifle shipments going back 2 or 3 months. If it's Renan, what is your motive? He didn't have to stop to read the screen over her shoulder. He could simply glance at it, focus, and walk back to his workstation to close his eyes discreetly and recall what he had seen. whatever errors the Kaminoans had made in their attempt to improve Jango Fett's genome. The efforts had not been wasted. Renan looked up toward the doors. Her fine-boned face, while still aesthetically pleasing, suddenly froze into genuine anger and lost its prettiness. "Chiss," she said sourly. "You'd better have a good excuse this time." Odo fought every instinct to jerk around and stare. He simply turned his head casually to focus on a sheet of flimsy to his right. And there she was, Vina Jess. "You're dead." "I've been unwell, Supervisor." "But you're dead. So who are you?" "Heard of comlinks? I even had your landlord calling me, complaining you'd skipped without paying rent." "I know you're dead, because you fell a few thousand meters from a balcony after a chat with Ralon Vow." "Sorry, Supervisor." Renan was all acid, lips compressed. "See me first thing in the morning. I'm off shift now." She shut down her workstation, grabbed her jacket, and made a move toward the doors. Then she paused and turned to Ordo. "Core, it's 16:30, she said. "Come on. Time to go. Nobody will thank you for sitting there all night. Want me to drop you off at the barracks?" "Jess, either you're dead or you're an imposter. So, who did Vow kill?" "Thank you, Supervisor." Oda logged off and replaced his helmet, suddenly glad of the chance to hide behind an enormous white plastoid visor and stare horrified at the face of a dead woman, who seemed to be doing pretty well for a corpse. I'm going to meet some comrades from the 41st. Could you drop me off at the first taxi platform in the entertainment sector, please?" "I'm glad you're taking the opportunity to relax, Core." She seemed genuinely pleased. "You deserve it." Oda took one last look at the woman who appeared to be Jess, memorizing every pore and line, and followed Renan outside to the speeder bays. He slid into the passenger seat with 100 questions that had, for once in his life, yielded no fast answers. Renan powered up her speeder and sat still for a moment, staring at the console. "Honestly," she snorted, all exasperation, "that's the most unreliable employee I have ever known. Sometimes I could just kill that woman." Operational House, Kribu's Hut, 1630 hours, 384 days after Geonosis. "There they go," Nina said. Beads of red light were now dotted throughout the blue holochart of grids and lines that had expanded to fill a space a meter high and 2 meters long. The tracking dust was transmitting the movements of the 6 separatists they had tagged a few hours earlier. Etain walked around the 3D chart, studying tracks that were strung like necklaces, with occasional solitary beads, placed at intervals. The virtual representation of a section of Galactic City spanned the table. Some of the threads crossed and merged. Niner and Boss were still taking data from it and listing each locations while Val watched with Jusik. They do get around, Val said. Jusik, my boy, has anyone ever told you you're a genius? Jusik shrugged. And my friends are excellent shots. Good team, aren't we? Friends was an unusual way for a Jedi to describe clone troops, who were technically his to command and use as he thought fit. But Jusik simply didn't see the world that way. Etain found it deeply touching. Yes, excellent team, Val said. Boss glanced up, evidently pleased. It's wonderful to watch a job done well. That wasn't quite the Wallon Val that Etain had sensed, and found to be sheer passionless brutality. He was no less complex and contradictory than Scarata. Aten, reading from his datapad, ignored him completely. Val sometimes glanced at his former trainee, but got no reaction. Aten loathes him. He wants revenge of some kind. Etain found it hard to reconcile that with the methodical, considerate, and courageous man she knew. The one who had felt he had no right to survive Geonosis when his brothers had died. While the locations were collated, another frustrating hiatus had forced the squads into rest and recovery. They seemed to need to be busy fighting, especially Delta. Etain could taste their collective impatience. Maybe it was youth, but maybe it was that they didn't enjoy having time to think. Vaisev, Fixer, and Scorch had gone down to the restaurant to eat with Kor, but Darman was asleep in his room. Etain went to check on him and watched him for a while. He lay on his stomach, head turned to one side, cheek resting on folded arms, and twitched occasionally as if dreaming. They grabbed every small moment together that they could find, and it wasn't enough. Etain kissed his temple and left him to sleep. Scarata, wandering around with his hands deep in his pockets, gave her a conspiratorial wink. Looks like we've got 3 clusters in residential areas, Boss said. And now about 25 others, places they've at least stopped for a while, including shops. Scarata stood looking at the mesh of colored lights. We can't cover them all, he said. The clusters are the priority. Probably they're safe houses or bomb factories. Boss indicated a static point of red light that hadn't moved in an hour. I think that's our marked pack of thermal plastoid. Could well be. Got a list now? It gets longer by the hour. How long did you say that dust can transmit? Jusik cocked his head, calculating. 4, perhaps 5 weeks. Well, I say we reese the cluster points for a day or so, confirm the activity, and then decide which are the priority targets, and leave the rest to CSF. Nina jabbed his finger into the holochart, again to indicate another thread, growing as the tagged suspect moved to a new location. This target is trailing the other. No idea why. Maybe providing tail cover. Okay. You draw up a surveillance roster for the next 24 hours. And be prepared to pull people off it. If I get the call from Periv, or whatever his real name is. Okay, Sarge. Scarata finally allowed himself a little satisfied grin, which put Etain more in mind of a Gedan than ever. He gave both Boss and Nina ferocious pats on the back. Boss flinched while Nina turned and smiled, pleased with life. Nice job, you two. You two go and get something to eat. Etain fought an urge to walk across to Scarata and hug him. She had finally worked out what was happening. Omega and Ordo were clearly used to genuine affection from him. They touched all the time, from roughhousing and crushing hugs to hair ruffling. Delta didn't. They were uncomfortable with it. Whatever relationship they had with Val was much more distant, more competitive, more a desperate quest for his approval. Scarata played the good father, even now, dispensing treats, unashamedly pleased and proud of everything his boys achieved. Val looked as if he played the master, and being judged good enough was rare. It made her wonder more than ever about Atin. She would have seized the moment and taken him aside to ask, because it troubled her. But she was interrupted by the return of Phi and Sev. Phi strode up to Atin and grabbed the datapad from his hand. A strange blue woman with no taste in men wants to see you, he said. Go on. Lassima's complaining you haven't said hello to her today. Phi had a knack for teetering on the edge of offense. He also did a very good job of pretending that Atin's good fortune with Lassima didn't bother him one bit. The aching little void at the core of him, so plainly detectable in the Force, said otherwise. Jusek caught Etain's eye. He spotted it too. Then he looked past her toward the doors, and she felt something as well, anxiety and distress, very clearly emanating from a presence that could only be Ordo. He strode into the room and began unfastening his armor, jaw clenched. Scarata just waited. So, did you have a good day at the office, dear? Said Phi. She's not dead, Ordo said. Vinagis is not dead. Start again, son, Scarata said. A woman my supervisor identified as Vinagis walked back into the logistics center at 16:15 today. He stacked the plates and sat down on the edge of a chair, completely calm, except for the telltale gesture of one fist clenched on his knee. He looked up at Val, and it was her. Or at least, she looked the image of the woman Jusek picked up in one piece. Are you sure you killed her? Val raised an eyebrow. Oddly enough, yes. Humans don't bounce. I would have spotted that, I think. Then who was that at work today? You couldn't be mistaken. Odo didn't even blink. I remember everything I see in complete detail. I have etiquette memory. What I saw was the identical image of the woman we detained and who you took for interrogation. Of that much I am absolutely certain. Fairfax, Scarlett said. Options. 1. She's a twin or a clone. Odo counted off on his fingers. 2. She's some kind of droid designed to mimic her. 3. A Claudite. Shapeshifting is a useful skill for a terror group to recruit. But why would they want to mimic a dead colleague? How about that supervisor? I've logged her going into the freshers and searching lockers. But now I have no idea if she is working alone or with this Gist woman. She was genuinely angry when she saw her, though. Because the other Gist fouled up, maybe. We need to do some surveillance on this resurrected Gist. She's supposed to be on the evening shift, so I'm going back to the center just before midnight, and I'll follow her when she leaves. Jusic's lips parted, but Etain was faster off the mark. I'll come with you, she said. I'll be able to tell you whether she's a droid at least. I can do that with sensors, said Odo. I'll come with you anyway. Odo turned to Scarata. I don't like mysteries. He was clearly embarrassed. I'm sorry, Calbia. I'm not resolving this as fast as I should. Son, this is never a fast game. We are making good progress. Take it easy. But Odo wasn't the type to take it easy. He joined the contemplation of the holochat and picked up Nina's datapad. I'll take a clip of those. Dust rounds, please, Boudica, he said, just in case. Scarata drew his stubby Verpine handgun from his holsters. Better use this, then. More compact than the rifle. Thank you. Etain stood with Val, watching the erratic progress of the markers around the chart. A hard decision lay within it. At what stage would Scarata feel it was safe to bring CSF in on the surveillance? When would he share information with them? Etain understood his anxiety, but the simple mathematics of the situation was that CSF would be needed sooner or later. Odo began logging more locations into the datapad. His jaw muscles were working visibly. It must have been hard for a man used to being smarter than anyone else, except his 5 brothers, to handle the ordinary mortals world of being dumbfounded a lot of the time. Oh, Val said suddenly. What? Tell me what this building is. Jusic interrogated the database in the holochat emitter. CSF Divisional Headquarters. Well, said Val. How illuminating. Why is one of our tagged bad guys going in there? 16. Mihi solus tome. Mi solus da tolme. Mihi miduni an. Mihi ba jurivud. We are one when together. We are one when parted. We will share all. We will raise warriors. Traditional Mandalorian marriage contract and ceremony in its entirety. Logistics Center, Grand Army of the Republic, Coruscant Command, HQ, 2340 hours, 384 days after Geonosis. There was a lot to be said for having a matte black Army-issue bodysuit. It provided a reasonable amount of protection against blaster and projectile weapons, and it was low visibility at night, unlike ARC Trooper armor. Odo felt in the pockets of the knee-length dark gray jacket that Val had lent him, and felt compelled to inhale the unfamiliar scent of its wearer, antiseptic soap, weapon lubricating oil, and a maleness that was not his. But it disguised the skin-tight suit. That was all it had to do. It also disguised the Verpine shadowgun in its holster. What makes you think she's going to stick her to her shift hours? Etain said, looking slightly past him, head almost touching his. They sat in the closed cockpit of a speeder, parked 100 meters from the logistics center, where they could watch the doors. To anyone watching, they were just a young couple in a parked speeder, late at night, like 1,000 others at the moment. The fact she bothered to return to work at all. That means she wants her pattern to appear normal again. Etain just nodded. She seemed to be finding it hard to keep up her conversations. Odo could smell Damian on her, which fascinated him. Damian seemed able to step beyond the community of brothers and not feel adrift, just as his Knoll brothers could. But Odo found it distressing, and Phi seemed to as well. Odo wasn't sure if he would ever trust the female. Not after Chief Scientist Kosai first towered above him, gray and cold and unfeeling. He wondered if having a human mother would have made it easier. Etain shut her eyes again. She shuddered. "It's not cold," Odo said. "Are there Jedi working here?" "Of course. Jedi make great clerks." "I'll take that as a no." "It's a definite no. Why do you ask?" "I felt someone in the Force, very faintly." "Fairfek. Zay?" "Jusek being helpful?" "Close." "Gone now?" She went back to the silent contemplation of something beyond him. "Is your pep laser fully charged?" "Yes, Ordo." "Very noisy and visible. Last resort. As is a Verpine round." "I have the chamber loaded 2 and 1, Ordo said. "What?" "2 marker projectiles between each live round, and 1 live round already up the spout, as Calbier so aptly puts it." "And you can count?" "I do believe so." "I seem to offend you without meaning to. I realize you have an astonishing intellect." It wasn't that his mind was so remarkable that seemed worth comment, but that hers and others were not. He felt the need to explain. In an emergency, It's better that I'm able to fire a killing shot without needing to discharge 2 non-lethal rounds first. He stared into her eyes. They were light green, flecked with amber. Except for Scarata's, the only eyes so unlike his own that he had ever studied at that range were alien, and shortly before he killed their owner. Anyway, I can execute a triple tap with a Verpine, so it's academic. Triple tap? I've heard Daw talk about double. 3 rounds in quick succession. Some species need a little more stopping power. Oh. The PEP laser will stun most humanoids. And if it doesn't? Odo simply tapped the Verpine under his jacket. They waited. Maybe they really did look like a couple, having a private moment. Randomly created people did strange things. Staffing groups, 1s and 2s, began entering the building for the night shift soon. Movement behind the transparent steel doors made him focus and check his chrono. 11:55. Staff slopping off early. Stand by, he said quietly. Etain turned very slowly away from him, in her seat, ready to open the speeder's hatch, and slid out. 10 or 11 workers emerged. Odo and Etain slipped from the speeder and feigned ambling around in conversation. There was still frequent pedestrians traffic around the center. By 0005, the trickle of staff in and out had slowed, and there was still no sign of Vinagis. She has to come out that entrance. You're sure? Oh, okay, Odo. They waited. He wondered how long the two of them would look inconspicuous. And then he spotted the ginger, wavy hair, and the beige tunic he'd seen earlier, Jess. He watched her turn along the path and walked down the ramp toward the walkway that connected the complex to the business district around it. Then he made his move. Etain walked briskly at his side and grabbed his hand. For goodness sake, Odo, try to look like a couple. Odo didn't much like that, but the mission came first. They kept 20 meters behind Jess, hampered by the lack of crowds of office workers to hide among at this time of night. Maybe they should have waited until daylight, but nobody knew how much time they might have to act. It was a case of now. Etain did that side-to-side head movement, as if she was straining to hear something. Okay, people behind us, but they seem to have their minds on matters other than us. How do you know that? No feeling of focus on me or you. Handy, Odo said, but he hitched back his jacket and hooked his thumb in his belt to be ready to grab the verb. They had followed Jess for about half a click along the shrub-lined office walkways when the few pedestrians became none, and they had no cover between her and them. Jess turned right into a side alley, and Odo picked up speed, drawing his weapon and holding it as discreetly as he could against his chest. Where she's gone? The alley, Odo hissed. Are you blind? No, I means she's gone. gone. I can't feel anybody there. Odo cocked the Verp and checked the status indicator. He might need that live round after all. He slowed at the corner and froze for a second before stepping into the opening with the gun raised, two-handed. He was looking at a man's back about 50 meters ahead. No sign of Jis. Maybe that really is a Claudite. Oh my, Etain said. Odo was about to discharge the lethal round into the container of shrubbery and try for a tag pellet, but the man appeared to crouch into a low run. There was a reflection, a split-second gleam that said, "Metal alloy weapon." He fired instinctively. The silent shot hit something with a wet splut, and whoever or whatever he had hit rolled, stumbled, and raced off to the left, down another passage. Oda broke into a sprint, Etain pounding after him. He reached the point of impact and saw fluid, dark, oily, before discharging both tag pellets into the shrubs and lining up the next lethal round. This had gone wrong. He had got it wrong, but he couldn't turn back now. This had to be resolved. He swung left, and there was someone lying on the paving, writhing, and he aimed the Verpine. "Check," Etain yelled. "Check." And in the fraction of a second that he froze on the safety command she had heard Scarata use, a shockwave of air and heat flared past him and hit the figure on the ground in a blinding, deafening flash. Without his visor, he was stunned for a second too, but he dropped on the body, holding the Verp clear, and grabbed an arm. Its limb melted away in his grip. That second became endless, a layered image. "I'm going to throttle that Jedi. What the fick have I grabbed? It's a Claudite." He looked up at Etain, but she raised the blaster again and spun around. There was a second deafening, blinding crack of a pep laser discharging. Odo had a tight grip of something very heavy and black and sleekly furred that had stopped moving. And that was an odd thing for a wounded Claudite, a humanoid, when not shapeshifting, to become. A few meters from Etain, a human female lay crumpled on the paving, gasping for breath. It was Supervisor Renin, not Jis. Odo defaulted to training and opened his comlink. "Boudica, we need extraction urgently. 2 prisoners, both injured, now." His instinct told him to find some cover fast. The pep laser would bring someone running before long. He dragged whatever creature he had shot into an alcove and motioned furiously at Etain to do the same with Renin. It was amazing how heavy a weight a little Jedi could haul. But he wanted to hit her, and hard. "You Dikut," he hissed. "I could have been killed. Never use that command. Do you hear me? Never. If you try that again, I'll shoot you." Etain's right-eyed stare was either fury or shocked. He didn't care. "I thought you were going to finish it off." She knelt over the black creature at his side and put her hands on it. "It's alive. I have to keep it alive. You shouldn't have fired. That's my call to make. You shot a Galanan. There aren't any Galanans currently on Coruscant, so Zay says, spare me your hindsight lecture. Galanan shapeshifter Kuloran, spy. Never seen one before. Jusek, can you hear me? Can Val handle shapeshifter first aid? Jusek's voice was breathless. With you in 10 minutes, Odo, hang on. Where's your speeder? Not here. Just move it, please. Etana had her fingers spread on the creature's black coat. Her eyes shut tight. I can use the Force to control the bleeding. Okay, you do that, Jedi. He squatted over Renan and checked her breathing with the VUP held to her head. So, Supervisor, why were you following us? Renan looked in bad shape. Her eyes were streaming and she curled up into a ball, clutching her chest. Eden had fired the PEP laser at close range. Republic audit. You shoot me, chum. And you're in big trouble. What? Treasury officer. Show me, or you're the one in trouble, ma'am. She let out an anguished gasp and fumbled for her pocket. Oda decided to play safe and extract the contents for her. Yes, it was an identity chip. Republic Treasury Audit Division. You've nearly fouled up a GAR operation, he said. I was following Jis. Why? Supplies going missing. So did she. Who are you? She pulled back her head a little to focus on his bare hand, gripping the VUP. Well, that tells me you're not Trooper Core. Obviously. Are you the captain who came in the other day? Because you certainly recognized me. So much for deniability. This would be all over the Treasury in hours, if he let her get up and walk away. Not that she seemed able to. We need to have a little chat. And what's that? Renan tilted her head to look at the Galanan laying inert while Etane struggled to stabilize its wound. Etane opened her eyes a little. This, she said, used to be one of our allies. Operational house, Kribu's hut, 0:45 hours. 385 days after Geonosis. Scarata assembled a makeshift deployment tote board from 3 large sheets of flimsy and stuck them to the wall. It was old technology, real words on real flimsy, not shifting lights and code. He needed its solid reassurance right now. Things were turning Osikla. Core assigned to the team on Scarata's rim stood beside him dutifully, listing target locations by numbers of visits and tagged suspects on one sheet, while Scarata kept a tally of which commando was deployed and where they all were for the next 12 standard hours. Without his armor and bodysuit, Core was just a very young man with Durasteel mechanisms where he should have had real hands, and it broke Scarata's heart. Droid. They're making you into what they always thought you were, son. Scarata shook himself out of it and concentrated on the flimsy. He hated holotrots. He liked solid things that he could grab hold of, even if they had their limitations. It also kept his hands occupied when he was reaching the limits of his confidence. He had to stand firm. His men needed to see him in control, reassuring, believing in them. Believing in them was easy. He had doubts about himself. He glanced over his shoulder. Is that thing dead yet? Kabir, I'm sorry. I got this wrong, Odo said. Somewhere, no matter how much reassurance Karata gave him, he still seemed to fear that not being good enough meant a death sentence. Scarata hated Kaminoans with renewed passion. I should have known what the creature was. I knew they existed. Son, none of us knew any of them were on Coruscant. But they were, and that changed everything. Etain and Jusek were kneeling on either side of the Garanan, hands flat on his flanks, in some kind of Jedi healing process. Val watched with interest. He was the anatomy expert, although he was more skilled at taking bodies apart than repairing them. Damin and Nina seemed unwilling to go back to sleep and joined the audience. They had become close to a Golanan on Quilora. It must have been very hard to think of them now as possible agents for the Separatists. It was a black-furred carnivore, about a meter high at the shoulder, with long legs, 4 double-tipped fangs, and hard, unforgiving orange eyes. It now looked exactly like what it was, a shape-shifting predator. It's recovering, Jusek said. Good, Val said, because we want to chat with it. Etain looked up with that pinched expression she tended to adopt when she was angry in a rather vicious kind of way. I lived alongside them. We promised. We'd give them back their planet. And so far, all we've done is move in a garrison and trained the human colonists to look after themselves. Val stared slightly past her, straight-faced. I believe that was you personally, General. You and Zay. And you were only following orders. That's it, isn't it? Following orders. Knock it off, Scarata said. He didn't want Dominans pitching in to defend Etain. Everyone's nerves were raw. Tired, stressed people were dangerous. And they needed to be dangerous to the enemy, not each other. Odo, what are we going to do with Supervisor Renan? Bisani Renan was propped in a chair, arms folded gingerly across what must have been a very painful bruise to her whole chest. She was lucky that Etain's close-up range pep round hadn't killed her. But now the woman was just an extra complication they didn't need. Oda was looking her over as if she was a new species. And she was. There was a comfortable zone of attractiveness in females, and then there was a point beyond which it became too much. The very beautiful were intimidating and unwelcome. Renan had passed that threshold, and Scarata was ambushed by his own unexpected hostility toward her. You've probably guessed what we're doing, ma'am, Odo said. Anti-terrorist operations, correct. I'm sorry. I had no idea. But there was no screaming outrage or threats that her boss would rip the guts out of their boss. The usual response of bureaucrats. She just indicated the unconscious Galanin with a shaky hand. Where does the Galanin fit into all this? Other than mimicking Jess, we have no idea. Renan seemed to be taking refuge in investigation, continuing to do her job, even though she knew she was in a serious situation. Scarata respected that. So, if you two are Jedi, why didn't you spot the creature? Galanins can hide in the Force and shut us out, Etain said. When I first encountered them, I even thought they were Jedi. They're telepathic. We can't detect them. We don't know how many there are. And they appear to be able to mimic any species up to tall humanoid size. Perfect spies, Jusek said, and perfect predators. And we didn't honor our pledge to help them. So I suspect they've run out of patience. Look, no disrespect to our treasury colleagues, boys and girls, but can we refrain from discussing classified intelligence in front of Agent Renan? Scarata said. I need to talk to CSF. Core, you call up the Reese teams and see how far they've got on the main locations. Scarata wandered out onto the landing platform and breathed in cool night air. The Strill was curled up under the bench where, true to his word, Bao had slept each night. He probably thought it proved the point that he was a hard case, but there was no doubt that he worshipped that sticking animal, and it loved him. Aten's going to take a knife to him when this is over. I know it. Well, worry about that when it happens. He raised his wrist calmly to his lips. Jailer. There was a pause, and the sound of a woman grumbling, and sheets rustling. Of course Obram had a wife and kids. Scarata often forgot that other people had lives beyond their jobs. You know what time it is, Cal. To the second. Look. Which of your people was on surveillance in the bank of the Core Plaza? There was a long, sleepy, irritable pause. What? Today? None of my people. I guarantee it. Organized crime unit? I could ask, but they play these things close to their chests. Getting to be an epidemic. There's secrecy, isn't it? Tell you what, Scarta said, dropping his voice. Pay your OCU buddies a visit, and tell them that anyone we see in our scopes who isn't us gets slaughtered as a matter of course. Okay. You think they'll understand that? I can, but try. Try harder. Then, I don't want them crashing in like the Di Kutala treasury did tonight. Really? Yeah, an audit officer was sent in to monitor Gar staff ciphering off supplies. But that isn't my biggest problem right now. Don't mention the shapeshifter yet. Okay, here's my offer. I now have 43 individual locations that we believe the separatists are using or visiting in Galactic City. We had to concentrate on the high-value targets, and you really don't want to know what we'll be doing there. So, what if we give you a list of the others to pick off as you see fit? When we've leased the high-value ones and have an op order planned out. You know, precise timings. That way, we don't fall over each other. Obram had gone rather quiet. I can authorize that, but I've got no control over the OCU. Then find someone who does. I mean it, jailer. We are not playing by rules of evidence. You've really gone bandit, haven't you? Do you really want to hear the answer to that? Fearfeck. My eyesight problem has now affected my hearing too. I thought it might. I'm waiting on a meeting right now, and after that, I'll have a list for you, a reliable one. Just remember that if there's any talk of explosive sales being of interest to CSF, tell them to steer clear until further notice. I'll just say military intelligence and leave it at that. Good. You go carefully, friend. And those rather hasty boys of yours, especially Phi. Skaraza closed the link and went back into the main room. The Golanin was breathing more steadily, although his eyes were still closed, and the two Jedi were still leaning over it. It was just as well they could stop the bleeding. There wasn't a medic on Coruscant who knew a thing about the physiology of a shapeshifter like this one. And Renan was watching the whole scene suspiciously. Okay, so she had a treasury identity chip. Scarata didn't trust anybody, because this leak of information was still very much an inside job. Until he knew otherwise, everyone except his assortment of clone soldiers and the two Jedi he conceded was a potential risk. Ma'am, he said, I hear you don't approve of the war. Civilians did odd things in the name of peace. How much don't you approve of it, and why? Brennan chewed over the question visibly, and both Jusik and Etain flinched at something Scarata couldn't see. Brennan's expressions changed to anguish. She stood up with some difficulty, and Scarata noted that Ordo's hand went unconsciously to his blaster. This, she said quietly, is why I don't like the war. She went up to Kor, who was still conscientiously collating data and writing it on the flimsy with an expression of intense, frowning concentration. Kor, show me your hands, please. The trooper put his stylus aside and held them out, metallic palms up. Brennan placed her hands underneath so that his rested on hers for a moment, and looked him straight in the eye. Single prosthetic hands, efficient, unnoticeable, were common, but to lose both hands seemed to pass beyond a threshold of what was flesh and blood. It's not right, she said. It's not right that Kor and men like him should end up like this. I'm wondering what kind of government I'm working for. One with a slave army. That's what. You know how that makes me feel. Disgusted, betrayed, angry. Scarata knew that feeling only too well. He just hadn't expected to hear it from someone who did an office job and could switch off H&E with its heroic and sanitized images of the war anytime she liked. Jusek caught his eye and nodded discreetly. She really means it. She's upset. Scarata acknowledged Jusek with a slow blink. You said it, ma'am. Got her. We have an ally. She'll come in useful one day. Believe me when I say that what we're doing here is aimed at stopping things like that happening to more lads like Cor. Wenan seemed satisfied. If someone that upset could reach that state of mind, she made her way back to the chair and handed Scarata her datapad. Go on. What? I don't know what data might be of use to you, and you are not going to discuss detail with me. So take the datapad and copy what you like. You are very trusting. You are sure we are who we say we are? Wenan laughed and stopped abruptly. That had to hurt her ribs. Look, I know what I'm seeing. Now, if I'm out of contact for more than 48 hours, the Treasury will notice. So, think about what you're going to do with me. Scarata hefted the little pad in his hands. Treasury data. Codes. Encryption algorithm. Oh, my null boys will love slicing this. And who else is going to notice you're gone? Nobody. Absolutely nobody. Scarata pondered on that revelation for a while, as he watched the unconscious Galanin. Jusek and Attain knelt back on their heels, and looked as if they'd run a very tiring race. It'll be regaining consciousness soon, Attain said, and I still have no idea how you restrain a shapeshifter. Odo picked up one of the Verpine rifles, checked the charge level, and stood over the inert black body. This does the job, he said. Reese Team Observation Point, Residential Area, Business Zone 6. 0110 hours. 385 days after Geonosis. I wish I hadn't eaten that hot sauce, Sev said. Told you so. Fi held out his hand for the infrared scope. My turn. They had found a spot to hide between two top-floor apartments facing the building. They were watching. A 6th-floor tower of a house, with closed blinds at every window. A climate conditioning access space nearly at the top of their vantage point gave them an uninterrupted view below of a very quiet, very private group of homes, away from the skylanes in a dead end. The upper floors arced into a fashionable overhang, only 7 meters from the facing building. No passing traffic could enter from the front to bother them here. Not even a taxi, and the rear access was non-existent, which left only the roof for access by a small green speeder. It was private, and a good place to defend, or get trapped. I rather liked the idea of that latter. The access space felt like being in a drawer. They could just about crawl through it on all fours. Fi knew he wouldn't have enjoyed serving in a tank company at all. Roll on your back for a while, Fi said helpfully. Seth hesitated, then surrendered to the suggestion, with a groan. How many? They tracked from right to left with the scope. Well, I think we've got 10 bodies in there, judging by the GPR image. And they've been in there for an hour now. And they're not moving around much. I call that an operational base. Agreed? Okay. Let's set up the remote holocam and get out of here. Given the layout of that place, it's going to be a bit busy, slaughtering them all when we go in. I like busy, Sev said. Have Scorch and Fixer reported in yet? Sev held his datapad level with his eyes. Now that sounds like fun. What does? Scorch says they've confirmed the third cluster in a small commercial docking area. Curry fresh fruit and vegetables distributors. Loads of space-going vessels of all sizes. Yes, that's my idea of fun too. If we could get them all to meet up for a nice ride, dream on. But we could certainly stop them from leaving in a hurry. Vi backed out of the space, pushing himself on his elbows, with his DC-17 crooked in both arms, collecting more dust and dead insects on his bodysuit. He turned sideways onto a narrow shaft that opened into the building's plant maintenance room and dropped his left leg into the gap, searching for foothold with his boot before finding the ledge and scrambling down to the floor. Sev simply rolled off and landed with a thud beside him. Okay, where's next? Vi cocked his head. Want to wander over and take a closer look at the roof? Evaluate it for rapid entry. You know how to engage my enthusiasm. Vi projected the fire safety plans of the building, which had proved to be Ordo's best illicit data slice of the mission. There was no point asking the fire department to provide them. It just invited awkward questions about why lads in white armor wanted detailed floor plans of most of the planet's buildings. I hope they updated these. Okay, go. Left along the passage, the roof access, is the set of doors at the end. I love the fire department. They are so helpful. Nice uniforms too. They crawled across the flat roof, along the side of the climate conditioning machinery room, over a length of durasteel ladder laid flat on the waterproofing. Some buildings still had them to provide access to maintenance spaces. There were also the remains of a barbecue. They flattened themselves behind the parapet to peer through the breaks in the punch durasteel at the roof opposite. Oh, a flash speeder, Vi whispered. Don't even think about it. I meant that we could bolt on a few surprises, not wander off with it. Look, what does the word Reese mean, Navad? It almost sounds like wreck. You scared me, Sev said, and that's saying something. It's an opportunity we might not get again. So you fly, do you? Going to do a Django? You've got no style. Vi genuinely wanted to place a thermal detonator on the speeder. It could be set off remotely, giving them a relatively easy extra option for striking at the steps that they might need soon. But he was also itching to smack Sev down a little. The man thought he was the galaxy gift to adventure. So, if he wanted adventure, Vi would show it to him, Omega style. It also just happens to be the safest way to cross the 6-meter gap to the other roof. Safer than asking the Seps across the way if they minded two commandos taking a look at their roof anyway. I edged the edge backwards and began placing the sections of ladder end to end. They slotted together neatly. Then he crawled back to the parapet and gave the chasm an appraising glance. He peered across then down 6 floors. That'll reach, I reckon. Sev leaned over next to him. So, you're going to crawl across? Vi took the end of the ladder and began to move it carefully to avoid loud scraping sounds. Sev took the other end and they balanced it lengthways on the parapet. No, I'm going to run. Vi, they say someone spiked my vat, but I reckon someone really spiked yours. Lost your nerve? Dekut. If I plummet heroically to my doom, then you can crawl across, deal? I hate it when you try to provoke me into showing you how it's done. Like this? If I had seconds, they needed to be across the gap and gone before anyone spotted them. He leaned down hard on one end of the ladder, lifting it enough to swing it out horizontally, and dropped the other end on the facing parapet. 30 meters below, death waited, and if it wasn't death, it was paralysis. He stepped up on the parapet, testing the first rung with his boot, and then focused straight ahead on the other side. Then he sprinted. He still had no idea how his body calculated the gaps, but he hit every rung and landed on the far side, dropping flat. When he knelt upright, Sev was staring at him. Vi beckoned, "Come on." Sev ran for it. Vi broke his landing as he jumped off the parapet. He noted Sev's clenched jaw with satisfaction. "Easy," Vi mouthed. Sev gave him a hand signal, one of his especially eloquent gestures of disapproval. The roof had a few steps down to doors that the Hull of Plans showed as access to the top floor of the living area, and the turbo lift shaft they didn't look that substantial in the flesh, but the plans appeared to be accurate. They didn't always get updated after renovations. A quick application of thermal tape on the doors, and it would be easy to lob a few grenades down the hole to soften up the residents before going in. Vi gave Sev a thumbs up and took a magnet det out of his belt. It slid into place in the speeder's air intake with a faint thack. Back, Vi gestured. He teetered on the parapet and then ran across the durasteel rungs again, feeling them flex and spring back under his boots. When he looked back, Sev was lining up for the sprint too. Vi beckoned encouragingly. Sev went for it. He was 2/3 of the way across when he slipped. He grabbed for a rung and hung motionless. From his right hand, Vi's got somersaulted. If anyone looks up here now, most people screamed when they fell. Sev, to his credit, was utterly silent, but his eyes were wide and scared. He tried to reach up with his left arm, but for some reason didn't seem able to do it. I scrambled across the ladder on his belly and reached down to grab Sev's arm and haul him up. It was a potentially lethal maneuver on a narrow ladder, but Phi managed to get a grip on Sev's belt and pull him across the ladder crosswise. Sev was using his right arm. It was only when Phi gripped his left shoulder, to pull him in line with the ladder that he heard his sharp gasp and understood why he wasn't using that arm, and why he hadn't been able to lunge up to get a grip with his other hand. He'd hurt himself badly. "Udesi," Phi whispered. "Take it easy." There was pain, and there was whatever had happened to Sev. Phi dragged him back across the ladder a few centimeters at a time, and rolled him onto the safety of the roof before hauling the ladder back in. When he dropped flat again, Sev was kneeling in a ball, clutching his left shoulder. "Fiafek, this is my fault for goading him. Can you walk?" Phi whispered. "Course I can walk, you dikut. It's my arm." "I'll let you drop next time, you ungrateful chakar." Phi hauled him upright and decided to risk taking the service turbolift down to the ground level. By the time they reached the end of the walkway, it was clear that Sev had dislocated his shoulder and had to hold the arm against his chest to tolerate the pain at all. He said nothing, but it had made his eyes water. Phi had long used that phrase to indicate extreme pain, but it was the first time he'd seen it up close, and it wasn't funny. "If I miss this mission, I'm going to show you a really interesting trick with a vibroblade. Sev, take it easy." Phi always kept his medpack on his belt. He fumbled for the single-use shot of painkiller and stabbed it into Sev's triceps. "We'll slap some Bacta on it back at base. Yeah, and maybe that'll work when I rip your head off too. It was an accident. It was a stupid stunt. I never had accidents with Delta." "Well, you're just Val's perfect little soldier boys then, aren't you? We screw up, and then we get up and go on. I have to complete this mission. Not if you're a liability, you don't. Look, injuries happen. Stay at base and monitor the comlinks. You don't understand." Really, Phi racked his brains for first aid training. "Funny. I thought we did the same job. Look, get in here and let me have a look." They slipped into the sheltered lobby of an office block and hid behind a pillar. Phi detached Sev's bodysuit sleeve from his shoulder's seam and took a look in the dim security lights. The line of the shoulder looked unnaturally square, where the ball of the humerus had shifted out of the socket, and was pushing the deltoid muscle up and out of shape. This was going to hurt. "Okay. On the count of 4, Phi said. He took Sev's wrist in his right hand, stretching out the arm, and braced his left hand against the man's chest. Then he paused and looked him in the eye in his most reassuring, "I know what I'm doing" way. "See, when you get a dislocation like this, You have to do what they call reducing it by 4. Sev yelped. The joint made a wet sound as it slipped back into the socket. Sorry, Nevad. Fai folded Sev's arm back against his chest and held it there while he struggled to get the sleeve section reattached. He could almost feel the torn ligaments and muscle fibers screaming. Sev's face was white, his lips compressed. Nothing worse than bracing for it, though. For a moron, you're not a bad medic. Cal said that if we could take a body apart, we ought to learn a bit more about putting it back together again, if we needed to. 5. I have to be fit to fight. Okay. Bacta in ice packs. Right as rain in no time. Val'll kill me. Look. What is this thing with Val? Fai pulled Sev out into the walkway again, and they jogged back to the speeder they left a block away. I know he had a reputation for beating the stuffings out of trainees, but why are you ready to gut a tin? Atin's sworn he'll kill Val. Fai almost stopped dead. Atin. Old, don't interrupt me. I'm working on a really interesting circuit. Our Attica? Seriously, Sev asked. Yeah. Sometimes I get serious. It happens. Okay. Atin's pod was the only one that ever lost men. Geonosis ruined Val's clean record. It's not that simple. Atin was doing that survivor's guilt thing when he got back, and Val just focused him a bit. Odd. Scarata hadn't been around when Fai returned from Geonosis. But he'd worry about that later. That explains the scar on his face. You got it. Doesn't explain the rest of the scars he was showing you. You ask him about that? Sev was as near to scared as Fai had seen him. He couldn't imagine being afraid of Scarata. The man might have sworn himself to a standstill when he was angry, but nobody in Scarata's company ever felt they had to fear him. He was Calbier. He lavished ferocious care on his commandos to the exclusion of all else. But Sev didn't want Val to know that he'd injured himself, doing something reckless, whatever the reason. Fai owed his brother some support. Okay, we don't mention the shoulder. Fai started up the speeder. We'll get it sorted ourselves. Bodica can do that force healing if the Bacta doesn't do the trick. But Val needn't know. For the first time since he'd met the man, Sev softened visibly. Thanks, Nevad, he said. I owe you.